Gold mining isn't just about machines, dirt, and sluices. It's about secrets, rivalries, and gambles that can make or break dynasties. And what you're about to witness is the boldest move ever made in the Yukon. Kevin Beets, long overshadowed by his father's towering empire, is about to attempt the unthinkable, outsmarting Tony Beets and pulling millions in gold right under his nose. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering the untold battles of the Klondike. It began with papers most people would have tossed away. Forgotten geological reports from decades past, smeared with coffee stains and dust, left abandoned in the back of a filing cabinet. Tony Beets himself had dismissed them years ago, calling them junk science not worth diesel. But Kevin, unlike his father, looked closer. The reports spoke of strange anomalies, magnetic irregularities, faint disturbances in the soil that suggested something deeper. Buried far below the glacial rock, invisible to the naked eye, could lie a jackpot Tony had missed. Kevin didn't announce his discovery. He knew better than to challenge Tony head-on. Instead, he presented the idea as nothing more than a quiet experiment, an academic side project, harmless and unthreatening. But behind this mask, Kevin's ambition burned. He quietly built his own strike team. Trusted workers who had grown tired of Tony's iron-fisted rule. Men who longed for a chance to prove themselves beyond the shadow of the Beets empire. Together, they would risk everything. Kevin wasn't just after gold. He was after legacy. His future, his pride, and his very name rested on whether this secret gamble would succeed. Whispers began almost immediately. The Beets camp is a family, but it is also an empire, and empires thrive on gossip. Workers started muttering in the cook tent. Kevin was breaking rank. Kevin was wasting fuel. Kevin was setting himself up for disaster. Tony, larger than life and louder than thunder, wasted no time mocking his son in front of the entire crew. "Dreamer without guts," he called him, a boy still playing minor in a man's world. The laughter stung, but Kevin did not flinch. He watched, he listened, and he vowed in silence he would beat Tony not by force, but by precision. The camp began to fracture. Some of the veterans, men who had mined with Tony for years, stayed loyal to the king of the Klondike. But others, quietly, carefully, started drifting toward Kevin's side, drawn to the calm, calculating fire in his eyes. A dynasty that had stood united for decades was becoming a powder keg, and all it needed was a single spark. That spark came from a map, old, weather-stained, its edges torn, its lines faded from years of neglect. Kevin found it buried under a pile of outdated records. At first glance, it looked worthless. But then he noticed the bends, the strange curves in the tributaries marked with tiny symbols. To anyone else, they were random scratches. To Kevin, they were coordinates. He laid the map beside modern LiDAR scans, overlays of the land stripped bare by laser imaging. Suddenly, the truth emerged. Hidden bedrock traps, invisible to heavy machinery, had been sitting untouched for decades. The journals of long-dead miners added to the mystery, speaking of gold that sinks deeper than tools can reach, as if the earth itself was guarding a treasure. Kevin's pulse quickened. For years, Tony had mined around this formation, ripping the land bare, convinced it held nothing. But Tony had been wrong. Beneath the ground lay one of the richest jackpots in Yukon history, waiting for the right set of eyes to see it. Kevin rolled the map tight, wrapped it in oilskin, and tucked it away. No one else could know. Not yet. If word leaked, if Tony even caught a whisper of this, the Beets camp would erupt in open war. Kevin had uncovered the key to outsmarting the king of the Klondike. And this was only the beginning. That night, he acted. Plans drawn in secrecy came alive under the Yukon moonlight, where the mining camp looked like a graveyard of silent machines, but pulsed with hidden intent. In the shadows, Kevin Beets orchestrated something entirely different. While the rest of the crew slept, his loyal strike team moved equipment across the frozen mud like phantoms. Engines were started in short bursts, muted by custom-built mufflers and shrouds that made excavators hum like generators left idling in the cold. Shovels were carried under tarps, and sluice boxes were rolled into position one bolt at a time, hidden under piles of scrap wood. By day, camouflage screens of lumber and tarps disguised the operation, blending into the tree line as if nothing stirred there at all. Kevin's men knew one mistake, one wrong sound, one slip of light, and Tony would storm in and shut them down before a single ounce was recovered. But instead of fear, the secrecy gave them purpose. Every shovel of dirt wasn't just labor, it was defiance, a rebellion waged in whispers against the king of the Klondike himself. Fuel was the hardest problem. Tony tracked diesel like a banker, tracked coins, and every drop unaccounted for raised questions. Kevin rerouted deliveries with cunning precision, logging fuel slips as maintenance orders under Tony's own name. Trucks appeared at odd hours, filled to the brim, then vanished into the night while official records told a different story. To anyone checking, it looked like Tony's own excavators were guzzling down the extra fuel, not Kevin's hidden fleet running under cover of darkness. The risk was staggering, but the deeper Kevin leaned into secrecy, the more the operation began to feel less like mining and more like espionage. Tony, however, wasn't blind. The empire he built had taught him to smell weakness, and it wasn't long before the scent of smoke reached his nose. Fuel reports didn't add up. Barrels were emptying faster than they should, and invoices carried inconsistencies too small to be coincidence. At first, Tony thought it was sloppy bookkeeping, but when he confronted workers, their eyes darted and their excuses cracked under the weight of his glare. "Somebody's wasting my diesel," he growled, his voice carrying across the camp like thunder rolling through the valley. Tony's suspicion hardened into action. He sent drones into the air, their buzzing wings scanning the dark valleys for unauthorized digging. He appeared unannounced at odd hours, stomping through the mud, helmet lamp blazing, demanding to see machines fired up on the spot. His inspections became legendary. One worker swore Tony checked the oil on 3 bulldozers at 2 in the morning just to catch Kevin off guard. And when he still found no answers, Tony turned to surprise patrols, barging into sectors where Kevin's men worked by day and flipping fuel logs in front of their faces. Kevin had expected this. He knew his father too well not to. Decoy trucks became his shield. Empty rigs sent rattling down muddy trails, headlights visible from miles away, carefully designed to draw Tony's eye in the wrong direction. The real work continued elsewhere, quiet and hidden, like veins of gold flowing just out of reach. It was no longer a simple mining job, it had become a chess match. Tony moved pawns in the form of spies and drones, while Kevin countered with feints and illusions, every decision calculated as if the Yukon itself were a game board with millions at stake. Each night added another layer of tension, another gamble against discovery, but Kevin's conviction only deepened. This wasn't just a contest over dirt. It was a battle for control of the Beets legacy. Then, one night, the sluices roared. What had been theory, risk, and whispered planning turned into shimmering reality as the first run of pay dirt churned through Kevin's modified machines. Under the dim glow of lanterns, thick streaks of yellow flashed beneath the mats, heavier, richer, brighter than any of them had dared imagine. A hush fell over the crew as the concentrate trays filled, nugget after nugget piling against black sand, sparkling like stars caught in earth and water. When the weigh-in came, even Kevin's steady hands trembled. Nearly $2 million worth of gold, nuggets, flakes, and dust, gleamed back at them. Richer than Tony's best recent runs, richer than anyone expected. The camp nearly erupted in cheers, men pounding backs, eyes wide with disbelief, but Kevin's voice cut through the noise. "Silence! Not a word leaves this place." He knew the danger. One whisper, one brag, one careless story over morning coffee, and Tony would descend on them like a storm. The gold was carefully sealed in steel crates, welded shut, and buried beneath stacks of unused equipment where even Tony's sharp eye wouldn't notice. Workers walked back to camp the next morning with straight faces, pretending fatigue from routine shifts while carrying the memory of glittering trays burned into their minds. Kevin lingered at the sluice, staring down at the mats long after the crew dispersed. For the first time, he had proof, physical proof, that his instincts were sharper than Tony's brute force methods. Proof that his father's arrogance had blinded him to fortune, sitting just below the surface. Kevin felt the weight of the crates hidden in the yard, the pressure of loyalty and secrecy binding his men together. The rebellion was no longer just an idea. It had teeth, and it gleamed gold. The king of the Klondike had been outplayed, and he didn't even know it yet. But triumph came with a shadow. Every ounce pulled from the hidden cut carried risk, and moving it meant leaving traces. Trucks had to roll, loads had to shift, and no camouflage could fully erase the scars of heavy tires in Yukon mud. Kevin knew it was only a matter of time before fate tested his luck. That test came sooner than expected. Mud tracks in the Yukon are as good as fingerprints, and for one terrifying moment, Kevin thought his secret would be exposed by nothing more than tire treads. A loaded truck, hauling pay dirt from the hidden cut, almost slammed into Tony's convoy head-on. Both drivers skidded to a halt, headlights slicing through the dark, engines growling like beasts facing off. For seconds, that felt like hours. The crews locked eyes across the mud. If Tony had followed the trail back, the entire operation would have been unmasked. Kevin's men scrambled in the night, erasing tracks with shovels, dragging tarps, even throwing loose gravel to scatter the marks. It was a desperate cover-up, and the danger hadn't passed yet. Hours later, a burst water hose sent a geyser of sludge spraying across the ground, straight toward the patrol route Tony had chosen that night. Kevin lunged forward, barking orders, and men dove into the muck, scooping with their bare hands, shoveling mud back into trenches before Tony's bootsteps reached the bend. From the ridge above, Tony's flashlight beams swept across the valley like a hunter searching for prey. Every sound seemed amplified. The clang of metal, the hiss of water, the thump of mud. Kevin froze, pulse hammering in his ears, as Tony's light paused on the very patch of ground his crew had just disguised. One more second, one more glance, and everything would have been over. But then the beam shifted. Tony grumbled, and his silhouette vanished into the night. The next day brought no relief. Tony's excavator crawled across the valley, its bucket tearing into earth alarmingly close to Kevin's secret vein. Each drop of gravel from Tony's machine was a thunderclap of doom. If his bucket bit just a few yards deeper, he would strike the hidden channel first, and Kevin's gamble would be exposed as theft in his father's eyes. Kevin had no choice. He shut everything down. Machines fell silent, sluices went dark, and men crouched in the shadows, holding their breath as Tony prowled near. The valley was so quiet the only sound was the distant groan of metal. "We're one mistake away from losing everything," Kevin whispered, voice so low it was more prayer than warning. The mistake came not from Kevin but from Tony himself. One evening, Tony stormed into Kevin's sector, mud flying off his boots, rage burning in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing here?" he thundered, accusing Kevin of theft, mismanagement, and lies in front of the men. His voice cracked across the valley, raw with suspicion. Kevin, standing calmly by the sluice, met his father's fury with a mask of composure. He spoke of sluice redesign experiments, half-true technical tests, meaningless to Tony but plausible enough to muddy the waters. For a moment the camp was still, everyone waiting for Tony to explode. And then Tony laughed, roared with mocking laughter so loud it made the mountains echo. "My boy thinks he's a scientist," he bellowed, and the crews laughed with him, though Kevin caught the glint in Tony's narrowed eyes. Behind the laughter was doubt, sharpened like a blade. That night, Tony acted on his suspicion. He sent one of his most loyal men to shadow Kevin's camp, convinced he would catch him red-handed. The spy lingered in the trees, watching every truck, listening for every machine. But Kevin had anticipated the move. He'd sent decoy trucks rattling down false trails, headlights cutting through the darkness, engines revving in directions where no sluices ran. The spy followed the wrong lead, reporting back to Tony with tales of empty trucks and wasted fuel. For now, Kevin's secret held. For now, the king had been fooled. But the Yukon doesn't keep secrets forever. One dawn, when the frost still clung to the earth, Kevin's hidden cut roared to life like never before. Excavators scooped into layers so rich they choked the sluice boxes. Gravel poured like rivers, and instead of black sand, the mats filled with solid bands of gold. Pans dipped into the slurry came up heavy, not with dust, but with slabs and nuggets so thick they clinked against the steel. Some were the size of fists, gleaming with a brilliance no one in the camp had seen in years. Men dropped their tools and stared, mouths open, eyes wide with disbelief. The jackpot had ignited. Kevin stood over the sluices as the trays overflowed, his boots sinking into mud laced with glittering fragments. He paced back and forth, hands tightening into fists, breath sharp in the icy air. This wasn't just a strike. This wasn't luck. This was proof. Proof that Tony's arrogance had blinded him. Proof that Kevin's patience and precision had outwitted the brute force of a dynasty. His crew looked on, whispering in awe, some of them trembling at the sheer scale of what they were witnessing. They weren't just miners anymore. They were conspirators in a rebellion worth tens of millions. The tally began climbing faster than any of them could count. 10 million, 20, 30. The numbers rising with every tray, every crate filled and sealed. By the time the dust settled, the estimates whispered through the camp were staggering. $45 million in gold, pulled from under Tony Beets' nose. Kevin said little, pacing in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though weighing the future itself. Then, at last, he spoke, voice low but firm. "This isn't luck. This is proof." And the proof glittered in every nugget, every slab, every ounce hauled from the hidden cut. The king of the Klondike had been outflanked, and though he didn't know it yet, his throne was trembling. But victories of that scale never stay buried for long. Gold has a way of leaving echoes, mud torn by tires, sluice water gone cloudy, whispers carried in the Yukon wind. Kevin's silence was deliberate, but silence itself became a signal. And on the other side of camp, Tony Beets was listening. The Yukon was quiet, but only on the surface. Beneath that stillness, Tony Beets was unraveling the threads Kevin had left behind, trying to stitch together proof of betrayal. He stormed through camp like a thundercloud, rage spilling from every step. By the time he reached Kevin's hidden sector, the richest pay dirt had already vanished, hauled away in sealed crates, tucked where no searchlight or drone could find them. All that remained was scarred earth, mud torn into jagged lines, sluice tails dissolving into puddles, ghostly remnants of a strike so massive it could have rewritten the Beets' fortune. Tony's breath came in heaves, his chest pounding with more than exertion. He stared at the silence of the Yukon night and knew what it meant. Kevin hadn't just mined dirt, he had mined his father's pride. With a guttural roar, Tony ripped the helmet from his head and hurled it into the ground so hard it split. The sound cracked across the valley like a rifle shot. "He played me like a rookie," he bellowed, the echo hanging in the frozen air. For the first time, the king of the Klondike looked not invincible, but beaten. Miles away, in the dim light of a canvas tent, pitched on neutral ground, Kevin gathered his crew. One by one, steel crates were pried open, their contents catching lantern light like captured suns. Gold, bars, nuggets, dust, slabs poured from the containers, a fortune so staggering it seemed unreal. Eyes widened, breaths caught, hands trembled. The tally soared higher with each count until the weight of it settled. Over $45 million in pure treasure, carved straight from the land Tony had once dismissed as worthless. A silence lingered before the whispers began. Some called it betrayal, others destiny. A dynasty had shifted before their eyes, and none of them would ever work under the same shadow again. Kevin stepped forward, holding a nugget the size of his fist, his voice low but steady. "This isn't about gold," he said. "It's about proving we can lead without fear." That sentence landed heavier than the fortune on the table. It wasn't just wealth he had uncovered, but a future untethered from Tony's iron grip. His men roared in approval, their cheers shaking the tent, their loyalty binding not to the legend of Tony Beets, but to the new king who had just declared himself. By dawn, the news had already spread like wildfire across the Yukon. Word travels fast in mining country, faster than machinery, faster than truth. "Kevin Beets outsmarted Tony," they whispered in bars and bunkhouses, "pulled $45 million in gold right under his nose." Rival miners smirked at the irony, the king undone not by rivals from the outside, but by his own blood. In every corner of the Klondike, the question was asked in hushed tones: was the throne vacant, or had it been seized? Tony raged in silence, his fury contained behind clenched teeth and bloodshot eyes, vowing revenge. Yet, deep down, he recognized the fracture that could never be sealed. His reign wasn't over, but it was cracked, weakened, haunted by the sun he could no longer dismiss. Kevin stood at the edge of camp, staring over the horizon as the morning light split the Yukon sky into fire and gold. Crates stacked neatly beside him glowed faintly in the sun, their weight both a triumph and a burden. He wasn't just Tony's son anymore. He was Tony's greatest rival, the heir who hadn't waited for permission but had taken the crown by force of will and patience. The dynasty wasn't broken. It was transformed. And as the wind carried rumors through the valley, Kevin's silence said everything. The Yukon had a new dawn, a new ruler, and the old king, for the first time in his life, stood in his shadow. Kevin Beets just pulled off the impossible. $45 million in gold ripped right out from under Tony's nose, rewriting the rules of the Klondike forever. If you want more stories of hidden jackpots, family feuds, and high-stakes gold rivalries, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next strike. The Yukon isn't done. This is only the beginning.